There is a kind of tired that sleep cannot touch. You have lived inside it long enough to know its texture, the way it settles into the bones before the alarm even sounds, the way it follows you into rooms where everyone else seems to move with an ease that feels foreign to your body. You have stood in doorways of your own home and felt the air press against you like a question no one was asking out loud. The walls hold the echo of your arrivals, and no one turns, no one shifts. The television laughs, the kitchen smells of something warm, and somehow you are the coldest thing in the building. You set your keys down on the counter, and the sound is the loudest thing you have contributed to the room all day. That moment, that particular weightless, devastating moment, is not about the people who did not look up. It is about the part of your spirit that expected just once that someone would. You carried that expectation for years, through kitchens, through holiday gatherings where the table was full and your soul was starving. You learned how to perform the smile so well that it stopped feeling like a performance and started feeling like a second skin. You passed the rolls, you laughed at the jokes, you filled glasses and cleared plates and said you were fine with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed the line so many times it no longer required thought. But underneath the performance, something ancient in you was keeping a different count, not of grievances, of absences, of the number of times you sat in the center of people who shared your blood and felt like a traveler in a country whose language you had studied but never truly spoken. The loneliness inside a home is a specific species of suffering. It does not announce itself. It just accumulates quietly, the way water finds the lowest point in a room and settles there without drama, without argument, simply by following the law of gravity. Your body has always known what your mind was slow to admit. The stomach that tightened before family dinners, the jaw that clenched during conversations that felt designed to reduce you, the way your shoulders rose toward your ears in certain presences, the ancient animal intelligence of a nervous system learning early that certain environments were not safe for the full expression of who you were. You did not choose that tension. It was written into your flesh by repetition, by the slow accumulation of moments where you brought your whole self to the table, and the table only wanted a portion of you. The agreeable portion, the quiet portion, the portion that did not ask too much or feel too loudly or see things that made others uncomfortable. You gave them that portion. You folded the rest of yourself into something small enough to fit inside the version of you they could tolerate. And you called that love, because you did not yet know that love was never supposed to require you to disappear. That is why, in the trilogy The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, the link is in the pinned comment, I explain how the exhaustion you have been carrying is not the result of weakness, but of an identity that has been compressed into a space too small for its actual dimensions. What you have been living is not a personal failure. It is the predictable outcome of a spirit too large for the container it was placed in. God designed you for expansion, and the very people who were supposed to celebrate your growth became, unknowingly, the first walls you had to learn to push against. The shower has kept your secrets better than any human being ever has. You have discovered this. There is something about the sound of water that creates a permission the rest of your life rarely offers, a kind of acoustic privacy where the thing you have been holding in your chest for weeks or months or years finally finds a way out without witness. You have stood under that water and let your face do what your face is not allowed to do in the shared spaces of your life. You have pressed your back against the cold tile and slid down it with a slowness that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the body's final private surrender to a grief that had been waiting patiently in line. That cry is not weakness. That cry is the sound of a spirit refusing to be entirely silenced. It is the proof that something real still lives inside you. Something that has not yet agreed to go numb, something that still insists on feeling even when feeling costs everything. Heaven hears that sound. Do not mistake the privacy of the moment for the absence of an audience. The most sacred things happen in the smallest rooms. There is a particular silence that lives between you and the people who are supposed to know you best. Not the silence of peace, the silence of things unasked, of questions that would cost too much to answer honestly, of whole decades of your interior life that exist in a language your family never learned and never tried to learn. You have sat in living rooms full of relatives and felt the ghost of who you actually are, hovering just above the surface of your smile, unable to land, unable to be received. You have edited yourself in real time, swallowed the observation, abbreviated the feeling, redirected the conversation away from anything too deep, too real, too you. You learned this editing early because the unedited version of you was consistently returned, like something the wrong size, like a gift the recipient did not know what to do with. So you became fluent in the art of strategic smallness. You mastered the performance of belonging while living privately in the ache of exile. The nights are where the truth lives, and you have had a long and intimate relationship with the specific quality of 3 a.m. Not because you chose it, but because something in you wakes when the world goes quiet, as though your spirit has been waiting for the noise to stop so it can finally speak to you without competition. In those hours, when the house breathes and sleeps around you, and you lie with the ceiling above you, and the whole unfiltered weight of your life pressing down, you have had thoughts that felt too large for the room. You have asked questions of God that you were not sure you were allowed to ask. You have negotiated and pleaded and gone silent in the kind of silence that is not surrender, but is something just past the edge of words. And the answer did not always come in the form you expected. Sometimes it came as a shift, a warmth, a sudden loosening in the chest, a sense that the room was not as empty as it appeared. You were not imagining that. Something was there. Something is always there. The presence that finds you at 3 a.m. in the wreckage of your private questions is not indifferent. It is intimate in a way that requires the world to be stripped away before it can be felt clearly. The epigenetics of a wounded family do not announce their presence. They move through the body like a current through a river. Invisible, directional, powerful, and old. You carry in your nervous system the unprocessed grief of people who came before you, people who also sat at tables where they were not fully seen, who also swallowed tears in private moments, who also learned to make themselves small enough to survive the rooms they were born into. This is not metaphor. This is biology and spirituality braided into the same truth. You did not arrive at your pain alone. You inherited some of it. The patterns of silence, of walking on eggshells, of earning love through performance rather than receiving it through presence. These were handed down without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without anyone intending to pass them along. Your work, the deep, sacred, difficult work you are already doing simply by being willing to feel what others in your line refused to feel, is not just for you. It reaches backwards and forwards simultaneously. You are not just healing your own story. You are interrupting a generational script that has run long enough. You brought light into rooms that ran on different fuel, and the friction was inevitable. Not because you were difficult, because light and darkness do not negotiate. They simply respond to each other's presence with the honesty of physics. Every room you entered carrying your full sensitivity, your full perception, your full refusal to pretend that what was happening was not happening, you changed the atmospheric pressure of that room. People felt it before they could name it. Some of them moved toward the feeling, but others, the ones most deeply invested in the particular kind of darkness your light exposed, they pushed back. They named your clarity as judgment. They named your sensitivity as weakness. They named your refusal to collude with comfortable lies as arrogance, as drama, as being too much. And because you loved them, because you needed them, because the heart always tries to make sense of rejection by locating the fault in itself, You considered the possibility that they were right. You are not too much. You are exactly enough for what you were built to do. The people who called you too sensitive were not offering diagnosis. They were offering defense. Sensitivity is the instrument through which the spirit reads what the physical eyes cannot see, and the people most threatened by your instrument were the ones whose hidden things were most legible to it. You knew when the smile was false. You felt the coldness under the warmth. You heard the unspoken. And the ones who needed their hidden things to remain hidden experienced your presence as a kind of exposure they never consented to. Not because you said a word, but because your spirit simply operates at a frequency that resonates with truth. The criticism was not information about you. It was information about what your presence was activating in them. The story of Joseph does not begin with the palace. It begins with the pit, and the part the palace story requires, the suffering, the betrayal, the unjust imprisonment, the years of invisibility, is not a detour around the destiny. It is the road itself. The brothers who stripped him of his coat did not know they were stripping him of the weight of a life too small for his calling. The Midianite traders who carried him into Egypt did not know they were transporting someone who would one day hold the food supply of the world in his hands. The pit was not the enemy's victory. The pit was God's curriculum. Every person who threw you into yours, who betrayed you, who dismissed you, who removed themselves from your life in ways that felt like abandonment, was, without knowing it, participating in a plan they did not author. The pain was real, the wound was real, and simultaneously, none of it was wasted. David spent years in a field that seemed irrelevant to his destiny. The sheep did not know they were being tended by the future king of Israel. The hills did not announce the significance of the one moving through them. The silence of that season did not mean the season was empty. It meant the preparation happening inside it required a particular kind of quiet that a public stage could not provide. The intimacy David developed with God in the shepherd's field was the very foundation of everything the palace would later require. He learned to fight giants in the fields before anyone was watching. He learned to worship in the dark before anyone was listening. The invisibility was not punishment. It was protection from a spotlight that would have consumed a man who had not yet been thoroughly built. You have been in your own shepherd's field. You have had your own seasons where the size of your surroundings seemed to contradict the size of what you knew you were carrying. That contradiction was not an error in the plan. It was the plan. As I teach deeply in the material, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, I left the link for you in the pinned comment. This pain is not a sign that God has forgotten your address. It is the signature of a preparation so specific, so intentional, so tailored to the exact dimensions of what you are being built to carry, that only someone who has been through it can recognize its shape from the other side. The wilderness is not your final location. It is your forge. What Jesus faced in the eyes of the people who had watched him grow up in Nazareth was not simple disbelief. It was the particular hostility of people who had decided who he was before he could tell them himself. They had categories for him: carpenter, son of Mary, the boy they had known since before he had his adult height. And when he arrived with something that did not fit their categories, they did not expand the category. They rejected the one who broke it. "Is this not the carpenter's son?" they said, and the contempt embedded in that question is not about carpentry. It is about the human refusal to be rearranged by the presence of something greater than expected. You have lived inside a version of Nazareth. You have been someone's familiar disappointment, someone's evidence that they already knew everything there was to know about you. The people who assigned you your earliest limitations were not your enemies. They were, without knowing it, the first test of whether you would allow their perception to become your ceiling. It did not become your ceiling. You are still here. You are still questioning. You are still reaching. That is not nothing. That is the evidence of an anointing that human opinion cannot cancel. The rejection that came from the places closest to you was the most disorienting kind, because proximity creates an expectation of reception that distance does not. A stranger's dismissal you can absorb and move on from. But the dismissal of someone sitting across from you at a table, someone who shares the architecture of your face, someone who has held your history in their hands, that dismissal does not move through you the way a stranger's does. It lands in a deeper place. It asks questions that take years to stop answering. Am I too much? Am I not enough? Is there something broken in me that they can see and I cannot? The answers to those questions were always no. But the questions themselves, the years they occupied in the basement of your consciousness, were not meaningless. They drove you deeper. They drove you to a search that a comfortable, celebrated, thoroughly received version of you might never have pursued. The wound opened the door to the search, and the search is what led you here. There is a scene in the night before David faces Goliath that the Bible does not dramatize, but that deserves more attention than it receives. The night before the public moment, the night before the story everyone knows, there is a young man who has already decided something in private. He has already made a covenant with his own courage in a field where no one was watching. The giant was not the first test. The giant was the public examination after years of private study. The battle the crowd saw was the echo of 1,000 smaller battles fought in seasons when the crowd was elsewhere. Your Goliath, the thing that will one day define your story in the eyes of others, is already being defeated in these private seasons. The wilderness is not the waiting room before your life begins. The wilderness is where the life that matters is actually being built. The envy that presents itself as concern is one of the most sophisticated weapons deployed against those who carry light. It does not arrive dressed as envy. It arrives dressed as wisdom, as caution, as love. I am just worried about you. You are being too sensitive. You always think you are so different. Who do you think you are? These phrases are not delivered by enemies wearing signs. They are delivered by people sitting at your table, people who love you in the only way they currently know how to love, which is a love that requires you to stay the size they are comfortable managing. Their discomfort with your expansion is not evil, it is fear. They sense in your becoming the possibility of their own accountability, and accountability is the thing people most reliably avoid. You do not need to hate them for this. You do not need to carry the weight of their fear as evidence of your own inadequacy. Their inability to celebrate your growth says everything about the limits of their vision and nothing about the reality of your calling. The criticism that followed you through your most important seasons of growth was calibrated, whether consciously or not, to sound like it was about your good. You are going too fast. You are too intense. Be careful. Stay humble. Some of it may have contained a grain of authentic concern, but underneath the grain was a field of something else. The need for you to remain comprehensible, manageable, sized to the expectations they had already formed about what your life was allowed to become. Every "be careful" aimed at a soul like yours is also, in some less visible way, a "stay small." You heard it for what it was, even when you could not name it. And even when you could not name it, something in you resisted it. That resistance was not pride. That resistance was the signature of purpose refusing to be contained by preference, the biological reality of what you have carried lives in more places than your mind. It lives in the shoulders that rose toward your ears every time a particular voice entered the room. It lives in the gut that tightened before gatherings where your authenticity was not welcome. It lives in the jaw that learned to hold things that the mouth was not given space to say. The body keeps the record with a faithfulness that the conscious mind cannot always maintain. The tension you carry is not a character flaw. It is the accumulated signature of a nervous system that was asked very early to perform safety while living inside threat. Your body did what it was designed to do. It protected you, but protection was always meant to be a temporary arrangement, not a permanent address. The healing of the body follows the healing of the permission to exist without armor, to breathe without bracing, to feel without immediately filing the feeling away somewhere safe and silent. God does not remove people from your life without consideration. Every departure that felt like abandonment was, at the level where the real decisions are made, an act of surgical love. The friend who disappeared, the relationship that collapsed, the family member whose distance became permanent. These losses were not random, they were deliberate, not cruel, deliberate. Because the destiny you carry has a weight-bearing capacity, and certain attachments, no matter how meaningful they felt in the season they occupied, were decreasing that capacity rather than increasing it. God does not take from you what you could afford to lose. He takes from you what was taking from you, even when it wore the face of something you loved. The grief of those departures is real and requires honoring, and simultaneously, the space those departures created was not empty. It was being prepared for something that could not have entered while the previous occupants were still in residence. The instruction Lot received on the way out of the burning city was not abstract spiritual advice. It was a survival command delivered to a person whose deepest danger was not in front of them, but behind them. The fire was real. The departure was real. The new direction was real. And the danger was not in moving forward. The danger was in the pull of the familiar, the gravitational force of everything that had already been named and known and called home, even when home had been built on ground that could no longer sustain life. Lot's wife did not look back out of disobedience alone. She looked back out of the deepest human instinct, the reluctance to let go of a version of yourself that the old life had housed. She became a pillar of salt, not as punishment for sentiment, but as the natural consequence of choosing to inhabit a moment that had already ended. You know this pull. You have felt the gravity of the old fire, the approval that never fully satisfied, the belonging that always came with conditions, the version of yourself that you performed for rooms that are no longer your home. Do not look back, not because the past was not real, not because the love was not genuine in the way it knew how to be genuine, but because the looking back does not return you to what was good about it. It returns you to the architecture of the wound, and you have already lived inside that architecture long enough to know its dimensions by heart. The new direction requires a kind of forward-facing that feels, at first, like free-falling. Because it is. You are moving without the handholds you have always used. But the falling is not what you think it is. It is not descent. It is the sensation of a person whose feet have finally left a floor they were never meant to stand on permanently, moving toward the ground they were actually built for. The solitude that you have been living in, and let me be precise here, the solitude that feels like exile rather than chosen stillness, is not your permanent condition. It is a transitional geography. It is the space between the tribe that could not hold you and the tribe that was built specifically to. You are not alone because you are unlovable. You are in solitude because the people who are meant to know you fully are themselves still being prepared, still being brought through their own stripping seasons, still being navigated by the same God who is navigating you toward the same convergence point. The loneliness is real, and it is also temporary in a way that eternity measures differently than the present moment can. The chains that ran through your family line are not your inheritance. They were your starting point. There is a profound difference. An inheritance is something you keep. A starting point is something you depart from. Every pattern of silence, every generation of smallness, every family system that taught its members to earn love rather than receive it. These were the conditions you were born into, not the conditions you are required to die inside of. You are not your family's wound. You are your family's interruption. The fact that you feel what they could not feel, that you are willing to examine what they buried, that you refuse to pass the unexamined inheritance to the next generation, this is not betrayal of your family. This is the most profound act of love your family has ever received, even if it never arrives looking like love from where they stand. Your nervous system is learning, slowly, cautiously, with the wariness of something that has been surprised by hurt before, that expansion is survivable, that breathing the full breath is survivable, that taking up the full space of who you actually are does not end in the catastrophe that past experience suggested it would. This is the slow miracle happening in you right now, the body recalibrating, the spirit re-expanding into rooms it had vacated for safety, the identity relearning that it does not need to earn its right to exist. This is not fast work. It is not clean work. It is the kind of work that happens in the in-between, in the quiet, in the 3 a.m. Conversations with a God who has been waiting for you to stop performing and simply sit in the mess of the truth of your own life without immediately trying to manage it into something more presentable. There is a new tribe being assembled that does not require the performance of the old one. People who already speak the language of your depth without needing it, translated into something more palatable. Connections that feel like recognitions, like the particular relief of finding something you had stopped believing was findable. These people are not a reward for surviving. They are not coming because you finally became good enough to deserve them. They are coming because the removal of what was never truly aligned has cleared the frequency on which you broadcast. And what you are now broadcasting is pure enough to be received by ears tuned to the same signal. You will know them by the ease, by the absence of the performance, by the feeling of landing somewhere after years of moving through the air. The calling on your life has always been larger than the containers your history offered. This is why none of them fit. This is why the rooms always felt temporary. This is why the people who assigned you your first identity always left you with the quiet, persistent sense that something about the assignment was wrong. Not because you were difficult, but because the assignment was too small. Heaven has known your actual dimensions since before you had a body to put them in. And everything that has happened, every loss, every departure, every season of invisible preparation, every midnight hour in the private wilderness of your most unglamorous becoming, all of it has been moving with a precision that your present vantage point cannot yet fully see, but that your spirit, in its deepest place, has always somehow known was real. The version of you that survived the rooms that could not hold you deserves more than survival. It deserves the life it held on for, the life where the full breath is possible, where the shoulders come down, where the smile does not require construction, where the gift that was always yours to carry is finally being carried in the open, in the presence of people who recognize it and call it by its right name. That life is not a fantasy. It is the destination of everything you have been moving through. Every door that did not open was directional. Every departure that gutted you was navigational. And you, who have already survived the unsurvivable, who have kept your face toward heaven, even in the seasons when heaven felt indifferent, who have refused again and again and again to let the weight of what happened to you become the final word about who you are. You are closer to that life than you have ever been. You were hidden on purpose, not because you were too broken to be seen, but because you were too important to be rushed. The concealment was not rejection, it was preparation. The silence was not absence, it was gestation. And what has been gestating in you through the tears in the shower and the dinners where no one looked up in the 3 a.m., negotiations with a God who never left, What has been growing in you, in the quiet, in the exile, in the long, unwitnessed wilderness of your becoming, is something this world actually needs, something that cannot be manufactured by comfort or accelerated by approval, something that only comes from the specific combination of gift and wound and fire and endurance that has been your particular road. You were not built to be buried. Not by the silence of your home, not by the voices that named you too much, not by the seasons where the sky felt sealed above you, not by the grief that settled into your bones like something permanent, not by any of it. You were built to rise, and the rising has already begun. It began the morning you refused to let the exhaustion have the final word. It began the night you cried in the shower and then stood up. It began every time you chose, against all reasonable evidence, to keep believing in a version of yourself that your circumstances had not yet confirmed. That choosing was never small. That choosing was everything. That choosing was the fingerprint of heaven on a life it has never stopped holding. The next chapter does not begin when circumstances change. It begins when you do, and you have already begun. If you study the trilogy, The Three Keys to a Prosperous Life, which link is in the pinned comment, you will see that everything you have carried, every wound, every wilderness season, every night of private collapse, every morning you rose from it, was always moving towards something. The link is in the pinned comment. Go there, not because your pain needs a product, but because your purpose needs a map, and there is one waiting for you. You did not survive this much to stop one step before the door that was always meant to open for you. The hidden remnant does not stay hidden forever. Heaven has been keeping you. It is time to step into what it kept you for.